Welcome to the deep dive. We're jumping into a stack of really fascinating sources today, all about the complex instructions that make you, well,
Yeah.
you.
Yeah, it's a deep dive into genes, definitely, but also your environment and this incredibly dynamic thing called epigenetics. We're sort of exploring how they all fit together.
And what that means for that old idea,
Oh,
that your destiny is just written in your DNA.
exactly. Because the picture that emerges from these sources is, well, it's much more nuanced and, frankly, much more empowering, I think.
Yeah, it really highlights the influence you can have over your own biological potential.
So let's unpack this stuff, see what surprises are in there.
Okay, let's start right at the beginning then. The fundamental instructions. What exactly are genes, in simple terms?
Okay, so genes. They're specific bits of DNA. You can think of DNA as the master instruction manual for building and running, well, us. Any living thing, really.
And it's long, right? The sources mention stretching it out.
Oh, yeah. If you took the DNA from just one cell nucleus, stretched it out end to end, it'd be about 2 meters long.
2 meters. How did that even fit inside a tiny cell nucleus? That sounds impossible.
It's packed incredibly efficiently into these structures we call chromosomes. It's this amazing feat of biological engineering, kind of like the sources said, packing the Eiffel Tower into a matchbox.
Huh. Okay, I like that analogy. And humans have 46 chromosomes.
We do. 23 from mom, 23 from dad.
But that number, 46, it's not like some magic number for life, is it? The sources pointed that out.
Not at all, and that was kind of surprising, yeah. The number varies wildly across different species. You've got fruit flies with 8, peas with 14.
Horses have 64, crabs nearly 200.
Right. And some plants go way higher, like over 1,500. So it's not really about the number of chromosomes. It's about the specific genes they carry and, crucially, how they're organized.
Okay, so you've got this huge amount of information packed incredibly tightly. How does it actually get passed down from parent to child?
Right. It happens when sperm and egg cells are made. You get one chromosome from each of your parents' pairs, these homologous pairs.
Okay.
But before that happens, something really important occurs. These pairs of chromosomes, they swap bits. It's a process called recombination.
Recombination. Sounds like shuffling the deck.
That's exactly it. Think of it as the great randomizer.
The great randomizer. I like that. Why is it so important?
It's absolutely crucial because it means every single sperm and every single egg cell is genetically unique. You know, a man makes billions of sperm in his lifetime, and each one is a different genetic lottery ticket. That randomization is why siblings, unless they're identical twins, are always genetically distinct from each other.
And that's totally different from how eggs are produced in women, right?
Completely different, yeah. Sperm production is continuous, but a woman, well, she's born with her entire lifetime supply of eggs already formed.
Before she's even born.
Before she's born? It's like that human matryoshka idea the sources mention.
Okay.
A pregnant woman carrying a female fetus. That fetus already has the beginnings of her future eggs inside her developing ovaries.
Wow. That's pretty mind-blowing.
It really is, and it has huge implications for inheritance.
It's amazing how far our understanding has come, though. Thinking back to some of those old ideas about inheritance the sources mentioned, they sound so wild now.
Oh, definitely. They really show the scientific journey, don't they? Before microscopes, people thought it was literally parents' blood mixing together.
Right, the blood mixing theory.
Then, 15th century early microscopes, you get the homunculus theory.
Ah, the tiny person idea.
Yes. The bizarre notion that a fully formed miniature person was just sitting inside the sperm waiting to grow bigger in the womb.
Crazy.
Totally. And then DNA discovery just blew all that away. It showed, look, it's not tiny people, it's the instructions. Incredibly complex instructions on how to build one. That whole evolution of thought. Replacing old ideas with new evidence. It's a key theme here.
Okay, so genes are the basic instructions. Now let's look at some of those examples from the sources where genes seem to have a really clear, almost deterministic effect.
Yeah.
The purely genetic stuff.
Yeah, some of these cases are genuinely mind-bending. One of the most famous, the Lydia Fairchild case.
Oh, the story where the mother's DNA didn't match her own kids? How is that even physically possible?
It seems impossible, doesn't it? She was applying for welfare, needed a DNA test to prove she was the mother, and it came back negative.
Oh my God.
Yeah, led to this terrifying legal fight. She's accused of fraud, faced losing her kids, maybe even jail.
That's unbelievable. So how did they figure it out?
The breakthrough came when they tested her mother, the kid's grandmother, and her DNA did match, proving she was the grandmother. That led them down the path to realizing Lydia was a genetic chimera.
A chimera? Like the myth?
Sort of, but in genetics, yeah. I mean, she has two distinct sets of DNA in her body. What happened was, very early in development, she essentially absorbed her own fraternal twin in the womb.
So, wait, like Siamese twins, but instead of being joined, one just becomes part of the other.
Exactly, but fully integrated. So Lydia's body had cells with her DNA from her original fertilized egg, but also cells with her twin sister's DNA.
So?
And the really wild part, the eggs she produced, they came from the cell line of the absorbed twin.
No way.
Yes. So she physically carried and birthed her children, but the DNA in the eggs, and therefore in her kids, matched her absorbed twin sister, not the DNA they got from, say, her cheek swab.
Wow. That just completely messes with your idea of biological identity
Ugh.
and motherhood.
It absolutely does. Had huge legal consequences until the science caught up. A really powerful example of genetic weirdness.
Definitely. Okay, what's another really clear-cut genetic thing the sources brought up?
The myostatin mutation is another great one. Myostatin. It's a protein our bodies make that basically acts as a brake, a muscle growth limiter.
Wait, we have something that stops muscles growing too big. Why?
We do. It's a natural regulation thing, probably to stop us using too many resources on muscle.
Yeah.
But sometimes there's a natural mutation. The gene for myostatin is broken, basically non-functional.
What happens then? Unlimited gains.
Pretty much. Without that break, muscle growth just takes off. The sources often show that picture of the Belgian blue cow, right? Super muscular.
Yeah, those things look like bovine bodybuilders.
Exactly. They naturally have this mutation. And we see it in humans, too, though it's rare. They did experiments in mice, disabled the myostatin gene, and the mice got double the muscle mass with no extra exercise.
Double? Wow.
Yeah. Shows how powerfully one gene's function, or lack of it, can shape a physical trait.
Incredible. Okay, what about something more everyday, like eye color? Is that pure genetics, too?
Mostly, yes. Eye color is primarily genetic, though maybe a bit more complex than simple high school charts suggest. Basically, you have melanin, the pigment, that usually gives you brown eyes. Blue eyes happen when the main gene responsible for making melanin in the iris is sort of broken or switched off, doesn't produce the pigment. So you see the natural blue color from light scattering in the iris itself.
But how can two brown-eyed parents have a blue-eyed kid? I remember that from school, but...
Classic recessive inheritance. You get 2 copies of the eye color gene, one from each parent. Brown is dominant, so if you get even one working copy for brown, you'll likely have brown eyes.
Okay.
To get blue eyes, you need to inherit 2 non-functional copies, one from each parent. So 2 brown-eyed parents can both carry a hidden recessive blue-eye gene copy alongside their working brown one.
Ah, right. And if the kid gets both recessive copies.
Bingo! Blue eyes.
And there was that amazing detail in the source about where blue eyes came from.
Oh yeah, fascinating, isn't it? The current thinking is that blue eyes originated from a single mutation in one person somewhere around the Black Sea, maybe 10,000 years ago.
One person.
One common ancestor. Which implies that pretty much everyone with blue eyes today, they're all descended from that same individual. A relatively recent mutation that spread quite successfully.
That's wild. Okay, so those are clear cases where genes seem to really run the show. But, as you said, the sources argue strongly that's not the whole story. Which brings us to epigenetics.
Exactly. This is where things get much more dynamic. And epigenetics, it's a younger field.
Yeah.
The name itself tells you something. Epi means above or on top of, so above genetics.
Above genetics. What does that actually mean?
It means it challenges that whole idea of genes as this fixed, unchangeable sentence.
Yeah.
Your genetic destiny. Epigenetics shows it's much more of a two-way street.
Right.
Your genes influence your life, obviously, but your life, your experiences, your environment, your choices can actively influence your genes.
But how? It doesn't change the actual DNA sequence, right? The letters.
No, exactly. It doesn't change the letters in the instruction manual. It changes which pages are open and readable and which are sort of glued shut. It controls which genes get turned on or off and how strongly.
Yeah, controls the expression of the genes.
Precisely. And the mechanism often involves these proteins called histones. The sources use that DNA curlers analogy.
Yeah, I remember that.
Your DNA is wound around these histone proteins. If it's wound really tightly, coiled up around lots of histones, that gene is basically switched off. Silence, like trying to read a book that's rolled up super tight.
Makes sense. You can't access the information.
Exactly. But if the DNA is unwound from the histones, it's accessible. The cell's machinery can read it. The gene is switched on.
Okay.
And this whole system, this on-off switching, is absolutely vital. It's how all the different cells in your body become specialized, even though they all have the exact same DNA blueprint.
Oh, so a muscle cell and a nerve cell have the same genes, but epigenetics makes them read different chapters of the book.
That's a perfect way to put it. Each cell type has its own unique epigenetic profile, telling it which instructions to follow.
So epigenetics explains cell specialization.
Yeah.
But the really big thing is how the environment can leave its mark, sometimes even passed down.
This is probably the most, well, profound part of it. Yes, your experiences, your environment, they can leave these epigenetic marks or traces, and sometimes some of these can actually be inherited by your kids.
Okay, that sounds big, like that mouse experiment.
Yeah, the mouse study was fascinating. They trained mice to fear a specific smell. I think it was like cherry blossom, by pairing it with a mild electric shock. Standard fear conditioning.
Right.
But then their offspring, and even their grand offspring, showed a fear response to that same smell, even though they'd never encountered the smell themselves, let alone the shock.
Whoa, wait. So a learned fear, it got passed down biologically across 2 generations.
It seems so, but crucially, not by changing the DNA sequence. It was transmitted via epigenetic changes in the sperm of the father mice, changes that specifically affected the genes involved in detecting that particular smell.
Okay, so it's happening in the sperm or egg cells.
Yeah.
The germ cells.
Yes, and this is a super important distinction the sources make. Only epigenetic changes that occur in the germline sperm and eggs can potentially be passed on. If you, say, work out a lot and change the epigenetics in your muscle cells...
The kids don't inherit bigger muscles automatically.
Exactly. Those changes stay with you. The germline changes are the ones with potential hereditary impact.
Okay, that's a key point.
Huh?
What are some other clear examples of the environment messing with gene expression through epigenetics?
Nutrition is a huge one, really powerful. The sources highlighted that stark difference in average height between North and South Korean school kids.
Yeah, 13 centimeters difference, wasn't it? Despite similar genetic backgrounds.
13 centimeters. It's massive. And it really hammers home how things like calorie intake, nutritional diversity, how profoundly they can affect the expression of genes related to growth. It shows environment overriding genetic potential on a population scale.
And it's not just Korea, right? The height increase in Europe.
Same story. The big jump in average height across Europe in the 20th century, that's overwhelmingly put down to better nutrition and living conditions, not some rapid genetic shift. Epigenetics in action, responding to the environment.
But it works both ways, doesn't it? Negative lifestyle choices can leave epigenetic marks too.
Absolutely. And again, especially concerning if they affect those germ cells. Alcohol, for instance, its breakdown products can actually cause epigenetic modifications in sperm and eggs.
Really? What kind of effects?
Well, the concern is it could potentially pass down a predisposition, maybe for things like addiction itself or certain mental health issues, depression, to children, maybe even grandchildren.
Wow, that adds a whole other layer of responsibility.
It does. And nicotine addiction, too, seems to have a genetic component, but its expression can certainly be influenced by lifestyle and maybe passed on epigenetically as well.
Okay, that's the downside, but there's an upside too.
Yeah,
Positive choices.
definitely. That's the encouraging part. The sources mentioned a study. Men exercised for just 6 weeks. Not like training for a marathon, just
Yeah.
regular exercise.
Yeah.
And they saw significant positive epigenetic changes. And it wasn't just about physical strength improving. These changes were linked to better cognitive function, too.
Cognitive, like thinking better.
Yeah. Things like faster math calculations, better concentration, even a measured increase in, well, intelligence scores.
So exercise isn't just good for your body. It might actually be kind of rewiring your brain epigenetically. That's amazing.
That's what the study points towards. And here's another really interesting one from early life, that mini puberty in the first 6 months.
Mini puberty.
Yeah, this little hormonal surge after birth. It seems to be a really sensitive window. Nutrition during that time can influence things you'd think were purely genetic, like penile length.
Seriously?
Yeah, one source mentioned a study suggesting babies fed soy milk formula during this period ended up having slightly longer average penile length compared to breastfed or cow's milk formula babies. Shows how early environment can tweak even genetically determined parameters.
Okay, this really paints a picture of nature and nurture being incredibly tangled up. with epigenetics as the sort of
Hmm.
mediator.
Exactly. The bridge between the two. And the classic way scientists try to untangle this is, of course, twin studies,
Right.
especially identical twins.
Right, because they're natural clones.
Pretty much. Identical or monozygotic twins.
Yeah.
They come from one single fertilized egg that splits in two. So they start life with virtually identical DNA.
Virtually identical, not perfectly identical.
Well, tiny differences can pop up during development from cell copying errors, but yeah, their starting genetic blueprint is essentially the same. So much so. The sources mention this mind-blowing fact.
What's that?
If identical twins have children with different partners, genetically, those children are full siblings, not cousins.
Get out, really. Full siblings.
Genetically speaking, yes, because the twins share the same initial set of genes to pass down. Wild, isn't it?
That is properly mind-boggling. Okay, so with this incredibly similar genetic start, what do the big twin studies actually tell us about genes versus environment?
Well, these huge studies, sometimes looking at millions of twin pairs, they confirm really high agreement concordance for lots of physical traits. Appearance, height, weight, metabolism, eyesight, even down to teeth structure and food preferences. Very strongly genetic. Identical twins are usually very, very similar in these aspects.
Okay, that makes sense. Stuff you can see.
But here's where it gets really interesting. They also find surprisingly high concordance, like 60–70% for more complex stuff. Things like addiction, alcohol, nicotine, but also depression, anxiety disorders.
60 to 70%, that high.
Yeah. Which strongly suggests a pretty significant genetic predisposition towards these conditions. Genes definitely load the dice, it seems, for more than just physical traits.
Okay, so genes play a big role. But identical twins aren't exact copies of each other, especially as they get older, right? This is where environment kicks in.
This is the absolute crucial point. That's where epigenetics and environment really show their power. The differences between identical twins tend to increase over their lifetimes. No trait is ever 100% concordant.
Okay. Examples?
Well, fingerprints, for starters. Identical twins have different fingerprints. Those are formed by the unique pressures and fluid dynamics inside the womb, purely environmental.
Oh.
And moles. They develop different patterns of moles over time. Moles are basically acquired mutations, often from sun exposure. Different life, different sun exposure, different moles.
Makes sense. What about personality? Character?
This is really telling. The sources note that while temperament and character show some genetic influence early on, that influence actually fades quite a bit by old age.
It fades.
Yeah, diminishes significantly. Which strongly suggests that your lifetime of experiences, choices, relationships, all the environmental inputs and the epigenetic changes they cause, they play a much bigger role in shaping the person you become than your initial genetic wiring does, especially over the long haul.
Right. So let's talk specific cases. There's that famous, almost spooky anecdotal one.
Ah, yes, the Jim twins. Jim Lewis, Jim Springer. Identical twins, separated right after birth, adopted into different families, reunited decades later.
And the list of similarities is just uncanny, isn't it? Both named their first dog toy, both married Lindis, divorced Lindis, married Bettys.
Both named their sons James Allen, smoked Salems, drank Miller Lite, chewed their fingernails, drove blue Chevys, built white benches around trees in their yards, vacationed at the same specific beach in Florida.
It's like something out of science fiction.
It really is. And these stories are amazing. They make great headlines. But as the sources rightly caution, these are anecdotes, very hard to verify scientifically, prone to selective reporting, maybe more entertainment than solid proof of genes dictating everything.
Okay, so fascinating, but maybe not the best scientific evidence. Is there a more rigorous case study showing the environment's power?
Yes. The sources contrasted the Jim twins with a much more scientifically documented case. Identical twin sisters, separated at birth, one raised in the U.S., the other in South Korea.
Wow, talk about different environments.
Exactly. Huge cultural, social, dietary differences. The twin raised in the U.S. became an academic, a lawyer, struggled with infertility. The one in South Korea became a cook, wasn't academically inclined, had 2 children, became very religious later in life.
Completely different lives, despite the identical genes.
Totally different trajectories. The sources said their main shared traits were really just physical looks, enjoying volunteering, and being quite open people. But importantly, the conclusion drawn was clear. Their paths diverged so much because of the different lives they chose within those vastly different environments.
So choice played a huge role.
Choice and environment, leading to different epigenetic profiles over time. This case, because it's scientifically studied, provides much stronger evidence than the Gym twins anecdote for the power of nurture and personal agency in shaping who you become. It really underscores that genes aren't destiny.
Okay, this understanding, this interplay between genes, environment, epigenetics, it has massive implications, doesn't it? For society, for us as individuals. Let's dig into some of those applications.
Yeah, one big area is understanding health risks, especially those linked to recessive genes and inbreeding.
Right. We talked about recessive traits like blue eyes, but they can be harmful too.
Exactly. Many serious genetic conditions are caused by recessive mutations. You only get the condition if you inherit two faulty copies, one from each parent. If you
Right.
just have one, the working copy usually compensates, and you're just a carrier, often unaware.
But if two carriers have kids,
Then there's a 1 in 4 chance for each child to inherit both faulty copies and develop the disease. This is why conditions can suddenly appear in families, and it's why historically, in populations with more intermarriage, like
royal families, like
Yep.
the Habsburgs.
precisely,
Oh, no.
the sources mention the Egyptian pharaohs, the European Habsburgs. Repeated intermarriage meant harmful recessive genes kept meeting up, leading to things like the famous Habsburg lip or jaw, and probably contributing to other health issues.
And there are modern treatments now for some of these things.
Yes, they mention Zolgensma, for instance, a gene therapy for spinal muscular atrophy, which is a devastating recessive condition, shows how understanding the genetics leads to potential cures.
And then there's that Iceland example, using tech to manage this risk.
Yeah, that's fascinating. Because Iceland was relatively isolated for centuries, their gene pool is less diverse than larger populations. So the chance of any two Icelanders unknowingly carrying the same rare recessive mutation is slightly higher.
Okay.
So they developed this app. It's partly a genealogy database, partly a social tool that allows people, if they choose, to quickly check if they share a recent common ancestor with someone they're, say, dating.
To avoid accidentally having kids with a close relative
Yeah.
and increasing the risk of these conditions.
Exactly. It's a really unique, culturally specific way of using genetic knowledge proactively for public health.
Okay, let's shift gears slightly. What about the idea of wealth genes? Is that a real thing? Can genes make you rich?
Right. The sources are very clear on this. No, there's absolutely no single wealth gene or IQ gene or anything like that. It's way more complex.
But there was that big UK study looking at genes and income.
Yes, a study of about 300,000 people in the UK Biobank. They did find around 150 genetic variants that were statistically associated with income level, but crucially, the link was indirect.
Indirect. How?
These genes weren't coding for earning potential. They were linked to other traits, things like a slightly lower genetic predisposition for ADHD or neuroticism or smoking, traits which in that society happen to correlate with higher average income.
Okay. So the genes influence traits and the traits influence outcomes depending on the environment.
Exactly. Interestingly, in that study, genetic predisposition for autism spectrum conditions showed little link to income either way, and variants linked to anxiety or bipolar disorder were actually sometimes associated with higher income, surprisingly.
Huh. Any traits strongly linked to higher income potential?
The strongest genetic associations they found were for things like slightly larger head volume, which is a proxy for cognitive capacity, generally good health, being more sociable, and delaying having your first child. So it's a complex web. Genes influence a set of physical, cognitive, and personality traits, and how those traits play out in a specific environment affects socioeconomic outcomes. Not simple genetic determinism at all.
Understanding all this complexity,
Mm-hmm.
it really makes the case for knowing your own genetic information, doesn't it?
It absolutely does. The sources really advocate for using this knowledge. For couples planning a family, preconception genetic screening is becoming more common to see if they both carry the same risky recessive mutations.
Gives them information to make choices.
Exactly. And for us as individuals, getting a personal genetic profile, often just from saliva now, can be incredibly empowering.
What kind of information do you get?
A whole range, your deep ancestry, ethnic origins, maybe finding living relatives you didn't know about. But medically, the big thing is assessing your genetic risk for maybe 200 plus different conditions.
And does it just tell you the risk or?
No, crucially, good tests usually come with actionable advice. Based on your specific genetic profile, here are lifestyle changes, dietary adjustments, specific screenings you might benefit from to mitigate that risk. Maybe you have a genetic tendency towards a certain vitamin deficiency, so you should supplement.
So it moves healthcare towards being more proactive and personalized.
Precisely. Instead of just waiting to get sick and then treating it, you understand your predispositions and take steps to stay healthier in the first place, tailored to your unique genetic makeup.
Okay, so bringing this all back to the listener. Armed with this knowledge, especially about epigenetics, what are the really practical things we can do? How can we use this information in our daily lives?
I think the absolute core message is agency. You have influence. Your choices matter, right down to the level of gene expression. You can actively work with your genes, optimize your potential.
And it's more specific than just vague, be healthy advice, right? Based on this stuff.
It is. It's rooted in the mechanisms we've been talking about. For example, avoiding harmful substances, alcohol, nicotine. We now understand it's not just about your immediate health, but potentially about protecting your germ cells from epigenetic damage that could affect your kids or grandkids.
That's a powerful motivator.
It really is. And on the positive side, remember that exercise study?
Yeah, 6 weeks for physical and cognitive boosts.
Exactly. So embracing exercise isn't just for fitness. There's evidence it triggers beneficial epigenetic changes for brain health, too. Prioritizing good nutrition, remembering the Korean height difference, it profoundly affects how your growth and development genes are expressed throughout life.
Right.
And although the sources didn't delve deeply into the specific epigenetic mechanisms for this one, they did touch on psychological well-being, managing stress, seeking support for anxiety or depression. It's all part of a holistic view. A healthier mental state contributes to better overall physiological function, which likely involves positive epigenetic signaling too.
Okay, so let's try and pull these threads together. We started with the basics. DNA, genes, the foundational blueprint. And saw how sometimes, like with Lydia Fairchild or myostatin, genes can have really direct, powerful effects.
Right. The starting hand you're dealt. But then we dove into epigenetics, this incredible layer of control on top of the genes. Realizing your DNA isn't this fixed, rigid destiny, it's dynamic.
Yeah, it's constantly responding to your environment, your experiences, your choices, turning genes up, turning them down.
Exactly. Everything from your diet, how much you move, maybe even stress levels, exposures your parents had. It can all leave these epigenetic marks, shaping who you are, your health risks, and potentially even influencing the next generation through those germline changes.
And those twin studies, especially the U.S.-South Korean sisters, they really drive home that point, don't they? Identical genes, vastly different lives, shaped by environment and choice. It's a powerful counterargument to pure genetic determinism.
Absolutely. It shows just how much room there is for nurture, for personal agency to shape the outcome.
So the big takeaway here really seems to be about empowerment. Understanding this science gives you, the listener, real power. By making informed choices about lifestyle, using tools like genetic testing proactively, looking after your mental well-being, you're not fighting your genes, you're actively modulating how they work.
That's it, perfectly. Your human blueprint isn't set in stone. It's adaptive, it's responsive. Your DNA is the potential. But epigenetics shows us that you hold a profound level of influence over how that potential unfolds. Your choices really do matter, biologically.
So here's a final thought for everyone to chew on, building on that idea of influence across generations. If your lifestyle choices today, what you eat, how you live, the stresses you manage or don't manage, can potentially leave an epigenetic signature, not just on you, but maybe on your children, possibly even your grandchildren. What kind of responsibility does that place on us right here, right now, for the health and potential of future generations?